Marcus Hale stood frozen in his own hallway, phone pressed against his chest to muffle the sound of his breathing, listening to his wife tell her best friend exactly how much longer she planned to pretend their marriage was real. The number she gave, 4 more months, matched precisely with their 5th wedding anniversary. And the reason she gave made his stomach drop through the floor. The words, "spousal support changes completely at 5 years," echoed in his head as he backed silently toward the front door, careful not to let the hardwood creak beneath his feet. He'd come home early to surprise Lena with her favorite Thai takeout. Instead, he'd discovered that his entire marriage was a financial transaction with an expiration date she'd circled on some hidden calendar. Marcus pushed through the door and sat in his car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, while the pad Thai grew cold in the passenger seat. 4 years of his life. 4 years of believing in something that had apparently ended long before today. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, trying to process what he'd just heard. If you've ever felt that sick feeling when you realize someone you trusted has been playing you all along, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to show you exactly how deep betrayal can go, and how one man fought back against a plan that had been in motion for months without his knowledge. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this ends. The evening Marcus overheard that conversation was a Tuesday in late September. He'd been working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized consulting firm in Richmond, Virginia, for 8 years. The job was stable, predictable, and paid well enough to support the lifestyle he and Lena had built together. Or rather, the lifestyle he thought they'd built together. He drove aimlessly through the suburbs for another hour, the conversation replaying in his mind on an endless loop. Lena's voice had been so casual, so matter-of-fact. Not the voice of someone conflicted or guilty. Just someone discussing logistics. "I know it's hard," she'd said to Maya, "but just a few more months. Once we hit year 5, spousal support changes completely. I'm not leaving free money on the table, Maya. I'm not stupid like you were." There had been a pause, presumably while Maya responded. Then Lena had laughed. Actually laughed. "No, he has no idea. Marcus is so wrapped up in his spreadsheets and project timelines that he barely notices I exist anymore. Which honestly makes this easier. I can coast through 4 more months without any trouble." When Marcus finally returned home that night, he'd composed his face into something neutral. Lena was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone, still in the yoga pants and fitted tank top she wore for her Pilates sessions. She taught small classes from their converted garage studio 3 days a week, and private sessions the other days. It kept her busy enough to feel productive, but flexible enough that she'd never had to commit to a traditional job. "Hey," she'd said without looking up. "Where have you been?" "Got caught up at work," Marcus had replied, his voice surprisingly steady. "Lost track of time." "Did you eat?" "Yeah. Grabbed something." The lie came easily. Everything felt easy now that he knew the truth. There was a strange freedom in knowing the game was rigged. He just had to decide whether to keep playing by her rules or change the board entirely. That night, Marcus lay awake beside Lena, listening to her breathe in the peaceful rhythm of someone with a clear conscience. Or maybe just someone who'd successfully compartmentalized their deception. He stared at the ceiling, watching car headlights slide across the plaster as vehicles passed on the street below, and tried to remember when things had started to shift. The signs had been there. He could see them clearly now, arranged in his mind like evidence photos at a crime scene. 3 months ago, Lena had suddenly become obsessed with their joint bank account, checking it multiple times a day. She'd called it being more financially responsible, and Marcus had actually been pleased that she was taking more interest in their money. 2 months ago, she'd stopped initiating any physical affection. When he'd brought it up, she'd blamed stress and mentioned that one of her Pilates clients was going through a difficult time and it was affecting her emotionally. Marcus had backed off, not wanting to pressure her. 6 weeks ago, she'd started taking phone calls outside, on the porch, in the car, even in the bathroom with the water running. When he'd asked about it, she'd said Maya was going through a rough patch after her divorce and needed someone to talk to privately. It had seemed reasonable, compassionate even. And just last week, Lena had casually asked him about Virginia's divorce laws during dinner, framing it as curiosity sparked by Maya's situation. She'd wanted to know about spousal support, how it was calculated, how long marriages needed to last before it kicked in differently. Marcus had looked it up together with her that night, both of them reading articles on his laptop about how Virginia courts typically handled alimony. He'd been helping her plan his own destruction. The realization made him nauseous. He slipped out of bed at 3 in the morning and stood in the bathroom, staring at his reflection in the mirror. At 36, he still had most of his hair, though gray was starting to thread through the dark brown at his temples. He had his father's angular jaw and his mother's dark eyes. He looked like a man who had his life together. He looked like a man who definitely didn't know his wife was counting down the days until she could legally cash out of their marriage. By dawn, Marcus had made a decision. He wasn't going to confront Lena, not yet. He was going to find out exactly what he was dealing with first, and that meant talking to someone who understood the legal landscape better than Google did. The next day, Marcus took a long lunch and drove to the offices of Dana Rios, a divorce attorney whose name had come up in several of the articles he'd stayed up all night reading. Her practice specialized in what she called complex marital dissolutions, which seemed like the politest way possible to say messy divorces involving money. Dana's office was in a converted Victorian house near the university, all exposed brick and industrial lighting, trying to make family law feel less depressing. She was in her early 40s, with sharp features and sharper eyes that seemed to catalog everything about Marcus in the first 30 seconds of their meeting. "So," she said, folding her hands on the desk between them, "tell me what's going on." Marcus told her everything. The overheard conversation, the behavioral changes, the timeline that aligned too perfectly with their approaching anniversary. Dana listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When he finished, she sat back in her chair and regarded him with something that might have been sympathy or might have just been professional interest. "What you're describing," Dana said carefully, "is actually more common than you'd think. Strategic divorce timing is a real phenomenon. People, and it's not just women, I've had male clients do this too, will absolutely time their divorces to maximize their financial outcomes." "So I'm not crazy," Marcus said. "You're not crazy. Virginia law does treat marriages differently based on duration. While there's no magic number that suddenly triggers different rules, judges do consider length of marriage when determining spousal support. A marriage of 5 years or more is generally viewed differently than a shorter marriage, especially when one spouse has been out of the workforce or working part-time. "Lena works," Marcus protested. "She teaches Pilates." "How much does she make annually?" Marcus had to think about it. "Maybe 15, 20,000. It varies. She doesn't have many consistent clients." "And you make?" 85,000 base plus bonuses. Dana made another note. "So there's a significant income disparity, and she could argue that she's been supporting your career by maintaining the household and working flexibly around your schedule. Whether or not that's true doesn't matter, as much as whether she can make the argument convincingly." The words settled over Marcus like ice water. "What do I do?" "That depends on what you want. Do you want to save the marriage?" Marcus surprised himself by answering immediately. "No. I don't think I can come back from knowing this. Even if I'm wrong about her motives, even if there's some explanation. She was talking about our marriage like it was a financial instrument. I can't unhear that." Dana nodded slowly. "Then you have 2 options. You can Wait and let this play out on her timeline, or you can take control of the situation yourself. If you choose the second option, we need to be very strategic about how we proceed. I want to take control, Marcus said, but I need to be sure first. I need to know beyond any doubt that this is really what's happening. Then we run a test, Dana said, a controlled experiment to see how she reacts when the financial picture changes. But Marcus, I want to be very clear about something. If you do this and confirm what you suspect, there's no going back. You'll know for certain, but you'll also have to act on that knowledge. Are you prepared for that? Marcus thought about the woman sleeping peacefully next to him while planning his financial ruin. He thought about 4 more months of pretending, of intimacy that meant nothing, of building a future that she'd already decided to demolish. Yes, he said. Tell me what to do. The plan Donna outlined was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would stage a job loss and observe Lena's reaction. If she was genuinely invested in the marriage and in him as a person, she would be supportive, concerned about his well-being, focused on problem-solving together as a team. If she was operating on the timeline and strategy Marcus suspected, her reaction would be very different. The key, Dana explained, is that Virginia is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. That means you can legally record any conversation you're a part of without the other person's knowledge or permission. If Lena calls her friend to discuss this fake job loss, and if she says anything that confirms she's staying in the marriage purely for financial reasons, that recording becomes very valuable evidence. Evidence for what? For establishing that the marriage has been irretrievably broken, and for showing that any request for spousal support is made in bad faith. Virginia courts don't like it when someone tries to game the system. Proof that your wife has been deliberately prolonging a dead marriage purely to maximize her divorce settlement could significantly impact how a judge views her claims. Marcus left Dana's office with a recording app downloaded on his phone and a script for the fake job loss prepared. He felt like he was betraying something fundamental about himself. He'd never been good at deception, had always prided himself on being straightforward and honest. But then again, he'd thought Lena was those things too. He waited until Thursday evening, when he knew Lena would be home alone between her afternoon client and her evening class. Marcus came through the door at 4:30 instead of his usual 6:15, his face carefully arranged into an expression of shock and defeat. Lena was in the kitchen, preparing her pre-workout snack of apple slices and almond butter. She looked up when he entered, and her first reaction was confusion. "Why are you home so early?" Marcus set his messenger bag on, the counter with more force than necessary. "I got fired today." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus watched Lena's face carefully, cataloging every micro-expression. There was surprise, certainly, but not the kind of surprise followed by immediate concern or comfort. It was surprise followed by calculation. "What?" Lena said finally. "What happened?" "Budget cuts," Marcus said, forcing his voice to shake slightly. "They eliminated my entire department. Just called us in this afternoon and handed us our severance packages. I'm done in 2 weeks." He watched Lena process this information, watched her eyes move to the side, the way they always did when she was thinking hard about something. Watched her fingers tighten slightly on the knife she'd been using to slice the apple. "That's," she started, then stopped. "That's really sudden." "Yeah," Marcus said. He moved toward the living room, making sure his body language read as defeated, overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to do. I mean, the severance helps, but it's not much. Maybe 2 months of salary, and finding something equivalent in this market." He trailed off, slumping onto the couch. Lena followed him slowly into the living room. She sat on the chair across from him, not beside him. That told Marcus everything he needed to know, but he waited anyway. "How much is the severance exactly?" Lena asked. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We'll figure this out together." just straight to the numbers. "About 12,000 after taxes," Marcus said. "And I can file for unemployment, but that's not going to cover our expenses. We might need to dip into savings." He watched Lena's jaw tighten. Their savings account held about $45,000, accumulated carefully over their years together. Money Lena had apparently been mentally dividing in half for months now. "Well," Lena said after a long pause, "you'll find something else. You're good at what you do." The words were right, but the delivery was all wrong. There was no warmth in it, no reassurance. She sounded like a manager trying to politely decline a vendor's services. "I'm going to go lie down," Marcus said, standing. "I have a headache." He retreated to their bedroom and closed the door, then immediately opened the recording app on his phone and set it to capture audio. He placed the phone on the nightstand and waited. It took less than 10 minutes. He heard Lena's footsteps move from the living room to the kitchen, heard the slider door to the back porch open and close. Then, muffled but audible through the bedroom window that faced the porch, he heard her voice. "Maya?" "Yeah, it's me. Listen, something just happened, and I need to talk it through with you." Marcus moved closer to the window, keeping himself hidden behind the curtain. "Marcus just told me he got fired today," Lena continued. Her voice was tight with stress, but not the kind of stress that came from worry about a spouse. This was frustration. Anger, even. "Budget cuts, apparently. He's getting some severance, but not much." There was a pause while Maya responded. "I know," Lena said. "That's exactly what I'm thinking. If he's broke, then what's the point of staying this long? I mean, the whole reason I've been hanging on is because there's something to actually get at the end of this. But if he doesn't have a job, and we start burning through savings—" Another pause. Marcus's hands were clenched so tight, his nails cut into his palms. "No, he seems really shaken by it. I don't think he's suspicious. Honestly, Maya, he's so wrapped up in his own head that I don't think he could see what's right in front of him if it bit him." Lena's laugh was bitter. "You know what the worst part is? I actually felt relieved when he said he was going to lie down. Like, thank God I don't have to pretend to comfort him. Is that terrible? It probably is. But I'm so tired of pretending." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. It wasn't his heart. That had already broken days ago. This was something else. Something like the final thread of hope snapping cleanly in two. "Look, I need to think about this," Lena was saying. "Maybe I need to just cut my losses and file now. Sure, I won't get as much, but something is better than nothing, right? And if I wait and he doesn't find work for months, I'm just stuck here supporting both of us while he spirals. That's not what I signed up for." This is the moment where everything changes for Marcus, and honestly, if you're not subscribed yet, you need to hit that button right now, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. Drop a like if you've ever had someone show you their true colors when things got hard, and drop a comment telling me if you think Marcus should have seen this coming. Now, let's get back to how he handles this nuclear bomb of truth. Marcus stopped recording. He had what he needed. More than he needed, actually. He had Lena's own words, in her own voice, confirming that the marriage was dead, and had been for a while. Confirming that she'd been staying purely for financial gain. Confirming that she saw him as a mark, not a partner. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the phone in his hands. The recording was time-stamped, clear, and completely damning. It would be enough to change everything. But first, he had to see this through. Had to maintain the fiction a little longer while he got everything in place. Because now that he knew the truth, he needed to act on it carefully. When Lena came back inside 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged from the bedroom with carefully reddened eyes, as if he'd been crying. It wasn't hard to produce. He had plenty to actually cry about. "Hey," Lena said, her voice softer now. She'd had time to compose herself, to remember that she still needed him to believe everything was fine. I was thinking about dinner. Maybe I could order us something nice, my treat. That would be good, Marcus said quietly. They ate Thai food on the couch that night, the same food Marcus had bought 2 nights ago that had gone cold in his car. Lena made small talk about her clients, about Maya's latest dating disaster, about a new series on Netflix they should watch. She was performing normalcy, and she was actually pretty good at it. If Marcus hadn't known better, he might have believed they were just a regular couple dealing with a setback together. But he did know better now, and that made all the difference. The next morning, Marcus called Donna Rios from his car during his actual lunch break. He was still going to work, of course. The job loss had been entirely fictional. But he'd been too nervous to explain that to Lena yet, letting her believe the lie for another day while he figured out his next moves. "I have the recording," he told Dana. "And?" "She called her friend within minutes. Said if I'm broke, there's no point in staying. Said she's tired of pretending. Said she might just file now and cut her losses." Dana was quiet for a moment. "That's about as clear as it gets. How are you holding up?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I feel numb, like this is happening to someone else." "That's normal. But Marcus, we need to move quickly now. If Lena decides to file first, it changes the dynamics. We want you to be the one to control the timing and narrative. What do I need to do?" "First, protect your assets. You need to move half of everything in your joint accounts into an individual account. That's your legal right, and it prevents her from draining the accounts once she knows what's happening. Second, update all your beneficiaries, life insurance, retirement accounts, everything. Third, gather every piece of financial documentation you can find. And fourth, be ready to file within the next week." "A week?" Marcus felt panic rise in his throat. "That's so fast." "It has to be. She's already talking about jumping ship. If she files first, she controls the narrative. This way, you do. And Marcus, stop pretending you lost your job. Tell her tonight that it was a mistake, that they're restructuring, but your position is safe. We need her to believe the money is still there. Otherwise, she might bail before we're ready." That evening, Marcus came home at his normal time with a carefully crafted story about how the company had walked back the firings, how his department was being consolidated, but not eliminated, how he'd been paranoid for nothing. Lena's relief was palpable and completely transparent. Marcus could practically see her mentally recalculating her timeline, reassured that her investment hadn't just evaporated. "That's such good news," she said, and she actually hugged him. It was the first time she'd initiated physical contact in weeks. "I was so worried about you." "No," Marcus thought. "You were worried about your payout." "Yeah," he said aloud. Crisis averted. Over the next 5 days, Marcus methodically dismantled his life with Lena while maintaining the appearance of normalcy. He transferred $22,000 from their savings into a new individual account at a different bank. He changed his beneficiaries on his 401k, his life insurance policy, his investment accounts. He made copies of every tax return, every bank statement, every piece of financial documentation he could find. He met with Dana twice more, building the case for divorce. Virginia was a no-fault state, which meant he didn't technically need grounds beyond the marriage being irretrievably broken. But having grounds, having evidence that Lena had been acting in bad faith, would matter when it came to things like spousal support. On Tuesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the fake job loss, Dana filed Marcus's petition for divorce. The papers would be served to Lena on Thursday, giving Marcus just enough time to prepare for what came next. Wednesday night, Marcus barely slept. He lay beside Lena, watching the ceiling fan make lazy circles overhead, and thought about all the small moments that had built up to this ending. The first time they'd met, at a friend's barbecue 5 years ago. Lena had been laughing at something someone said, her head thrown back, completely unselfconscious. Marcus had been drawn to that lightness, that ease. He'd fallen fast and hard. Their wedding had been small, just close friends and family at a vineyard outside Richmond. Lena had worn a simple dress and flowers in her hair. Marcus remembered thinking he'd never seen anyone more beautiful. They'd written their own vows. His had promised partnership, growth, honesty. Hers had promised the same. He wondered now when she'd stopped meaning those words, or if she'd ever meant them at all. Thursday morning, Marcus left for work before Lena woke up. He'd drafted an email to send her around noon, explaining that he'd known about her plan for days, that the job loss had been a test, that she'd failed spectacularly. He wanted her to have the email before the process server arrived, wanted her to understand that this wasn't impulsive or emotional. This was calculated, just like her plan had been. At exactly 12:15, Marcus pressed send on the email. Then he muted his phone and tried to focus on the project timeline spread across his computer screen. He lasted maybe 10 minutes before checking his personal email for a response. Nothing. At 1:30, Dana called. She's been served. The process server said she took the papers, read the first page, and then closed the door without saying a word. Has she tried to contact you? Marcus asked. Not yet. Give her time. This is a shock, even if she was planning something similar herself. Being beaten to the punch has a way of disorienting people. Lena finally called Marcus at 3:45. His phone buzzed with her contact photo, a picture from their honeymoon in Savannah, both of them grinning at the camera, her head on his shoulder. Marcus stared at it for 3 rings before answering. You son of a bitch, Lena said without preamble. You were testing me. You were scamming me, Marcus replied, his voice steady. I figured turnabout was fair play. I wasn't, that's not, Lena sputtered, apparently unable to find words. You had no right to manipulate me like that. The irony was almost funny. Almost. I have a recording, Lena, of you telling Maya that you were staying for the money, that if I was broke, there was no point, that you were tired of pretending. Would you like me to play it for you? Silence on the other end of the line. That's what I thought, Marcus said. Look, I'm not interested in having a fight about this. The divorce is filed. You'll get your copy of everything from my attorney. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. But either way, it's happening. You're taking everything, aren't you? Lena's voice had shifted from anger to something harder to identify. Fear, maybe. The money in the savings account. I logged in today and half of it's gone. That's my half. I'm entitled to it. We'll see what a judge says about that. By all means, Marcus said. I'm sure a judge will be fascinated to hear the recording of you admitting you stayed in our marriage purely for financial gain. I'm sure that'll work out great for you. He heard Lena's breath catch. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. How long have you known? Does it matter? It matters to me. Marcus thought about lying, but what was the point? I overheard you talking to Maya about a week and a half ago, about needing to wait until our 5th anniversary to maximize spousal support. You were spying on me? I came home early to surprise you with dinner. Turns out I was the one who got surprised. Another long silence. Then, so that's it? 4 years together, and you're just done? You were done first, Marcus said quietly. I'm just making it official. Lena hung up without another word. That night, Marcus stayed at a hotel near his office. He'd packed a bag that morning, knowing he wouldn't be able to go back to the condo until things were more settled. Dana had advised him to establish separate residence immediately, both for legal purposes and for his own sanity. The hotel room was generic and soulless. Beige walls, mass-produced art, a bed that was somehow both too firm and too soft. Marcus sat on the edge of it and finally let himself feel everything he'd been holding back for the past week and a half. The grief came in waves, Not for the marriage. That had died the moment he'd overheard Lena's phone call. But for the person he'd thought Lena was. For the future he'd imagined. For the trust that had been shattered so completely, he didn't know if he'd ever be able to trust anyone again. He cried for the first time since his father's funeral 3 years ago, great heaving sobs that left him exhausted and empty. And then, eventually, he slept. The legal battle that followed was exactly as ugly as Marcus had anticipated. Lena hired her own attorney, a man named Richard Voss, who had a reputation for aggressive tactics and dramatic courtroom performances. Voss immediately filed a counterclaim demanding temporary spousal support, half of Marcus's retirement account, and sole occupancy of the condo they'd bought together 2 years ago. Dana responded with the recording. The effect was immediate. Voss stopped returning Dana's calls for 3 days, presumably while he figured out how to respond to evidence that his client had been planning a strategically timed divorce for financial gain. When he finally did respond, his tone was significantly more subdued. "My client disputes the characterization of that conversation," Voss wrote in a formal letter. "She maintains that she was simply venting to a friend during a difficult time in the marriage, and that her words were taken out of context." Out of context? Marcus had asked Dana when she'd read him the letter. What context makes "I'm staying for the money" sound good? None, Dana had said. Which is why they're going to try to settle this quickly. They know that recording is devastating. If this goes to a judge, Lena's claims for substantial support are dead on arrival. But Lena's attorney was persistent, if nothing else. The initial settlement offer arrived 2 weeks after the divorce was filed. It demanded $1,200 per month in spousal support for 3 years, half of Marcus's 401k balance, and the right for Lena to remain in the condo until she found suitable alternative housing. Marcus rejected it immediately. "She's not getting a dime in alimony," he told Dana. "I'll give her half the equity in the condo, half our joint assets, and her personal belongings. That's it." "They're going to push back hard," Dana warned. "Let them. We have the recording." The next month was a war of attrition, offer and counteroffer, each side trying to find the breaking point of the other. Lena's attorney kept trying to characterize the recording as inadmissible, as illegally obtained, as hearsay. Dana kept patiently explaining that it was none of those things, that Virginia law was crystal clear on one-party consent, and that Lena's own voice saying the words was about as far from hearsay as you could get. During this time, Marcus threw himself into work with an intensity that worried his colleagues. He took on extra projects, volunteered for the assignments no one else wanted, stayed late every night working on proposals and presentations. It was easier than going back to the hotel and sitting alone with his thoughts. His friends noticed. His boss noticed. Everyone asked if he was okay, and Marcus gave them all the same answer. "I'm dealing with some personal stuff, but I'm fine." He wasn't fine, but he was functional, which felt like an achievement. In early November, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from Maya Collins herself. She asked to meet him for coffee, and curiosity got the better of his judgment. He agreed. They met at a Starbucks near the university. Maya looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She ordered a black coffee and sat across from Marcus, with the posture of someone preparing for an execution. "I need to tell you something," Maya said without preamble. "And I need you to know I'm not telling you this to help Lena. I'm telling you this because I can't sleep anymore." Marcus waited. "The divorce timing thing," Maya continued, her hands wrapped tight around her coffee cup. "That was my idea, not Lena's. She was actually thinking about leaving you about 6 months ago, said she wasn't happy, said the marriage felt stale. And I'm the one who told her to wait, to strategize, to think about the financial implications before she did anything rash." She looked up at Marcus, and he was startled to see tears in her eyes. "My divorce destroyed me financially," Maya said. "I left my ex-husband after 2 years because he was controlling, and I couldn't take it anymore. And the judge gave me nothing because the marriage was so short and I had my own income. I've been struggling ever since, working 2 jobs just to keep my apartment. And when Lena told me she was unhappy with you, all I could think about was how she needed to be smarter than I was, how she needed to protect herself financially before making any moves." "So you coached her," Marcus said flatly. "Yes. I told her about the 5-year mark, about how courts view longer marriages differently. I told her to document everything, to make sure she could prove financial dependence. I told her," Maya's voice cracked, "I told her to fake it until she made it, to hang on until the timing was right." Marcus felt a strange mixture of anger and pity. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I was wrong," Maya said simply. "My situation was different from Lena's. My ex was actually abusive. You're just a guy who worked too much and didn't pay enough attention. That doesn't make you a villain. And I realize now that I projected all my bitterness and anger onto Lena's situation. I turned her relationship problems into a financial scheme because that's how I see everything now, through the lens of my own failure." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Lena wasn't naturally manipulative. She was just scared and unhappy, and I gave her what felt like a roadmap, and now both of your lives are blown up, and I have to live with knowing I caused that. If this is hitting you right in the feels, make sure you've liked this video because the intensity is about to go through the roof. We're heading into the final confrontation, and you're going to want to see how this whole calculated mess finally falls apart." Marcus didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to rage at Maya for her interference, for poisoning his marriage with her cynicism. But another part recognized that Lena was an adult who'd made her own choices. Maya might have provided the blueprint, but Lena had decided to follow it. "Are you going to tell Lena you talked to me?" Marcus asked finally. "I already did. She's furious. We're not friends anymore." Maya laughed bitterly. "Which is probably for the best. I'm not good for anyone right now." "For what it's worth," Marcus said, standing to leave. "I hope you figure out how to stop being so angry. Not for my sake. For yours." Maya nodded, staring down at her untouched coffee. Marcus left her sitting there and walked back to his car, feeling strangely lighter. Knowing the origin story of Lena's betrayal didn't make it hurt less, but it did make it feel less personal somehow. Less about him specifically, and more about Lena's own fears and insecurities manifesting in the worst possible way. The final settlement was reached in mid-November. After nearly 2 months of negotiation, Lena's attorney finally acknowledged that his client's position was untenable. The recording made any significant spousal support claim impossible, and dragging things out was only costing both parties money in legal fees. The terms were close to what Marcus had originally proposed. No alimony, a 50-50 split of the equity in the condo, which they would sell immediately, each party keeping their own retirement accounts and personal assets, and a clean break with no ongoing financial obligations. Lena signed the agreement without requesting any changes. Marcus's signature was witnessed by Dana, and just like that, his marriage was functionally over. The divorce wouldn't be finalized for another 60 days. Virginia required a minimum separation period, but the hard part was done. Marcus celebrated by going home to the apartment he'd rented the previous month, a 1-bedroom in a newer building downtown, and sleeping for 14 hours straight. The weeks that followed were strange. Marcus had to learn how to be single again after 5 years of coupledom. He had to relearn how to cook for one, how to make decisions without considering someone else's preferences, how to fill his evenings without Lena's classes and social commitments structuring their calendar. He went to therapy for the first time in his life, at Dana's gentle suggestion. His therapist, a patient man named Dr. Erickson, helped Marcus understand that his trust issues were valid, but didn't have to be permanent. That being deceived didn't mean he was bad at reading people. It meant someone he loved had actively worked to deceive him, which was different. "You're not obligated to forgive her," Dr. Erickson said during one session. "But you do need to forgive yourself for not seeing it coming. You can't spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for trusting your wife." By December, Marcus felt like he was finally starting to breathe again. Untold had promoted him to senior project coordinator, recognizing the extra effort he'd been putting in. He'd started going to the gym again, something he'd let slide during the marriage. He'd reconnected with old friends he'd lost touch with over the years. And then, 2 weeks before Christmas, he received an email from Lena. The subject line was simply, "I'm sorry." Marcus stared at it for a long time before opening it. Part of him wanted to delete it unread, to maintain the clean break they'd established. But curiosity won out. The email was long, rambling, clearly written over multiple sessions, and never quite edited into coherence. But the core message was clear. Lena was sorry. Not sorry that she'd gotten caught. Sorry that she'd let her fear and insecurity turn her into someone she didn't recognize. She wrote about her friendship with Maya, about how Maya's bitterness had infected her own thinking, about how she'd started viewing their marriage as a transaction instead of a partnership, about how the longer she'd pretended, the harder it had become to stop pretending. "I did love you," Lena wrote. "I want you to know that. At the beginning, I really did. But somewhere along the way, I started keeping score, started measuring what I was getting versus what I was giving. And once you start thinking that way about a marriage, it's hard to stop." She acknowledged that the recording had been devastating to hear played back to her by her own attorney, hearing her own words, her own voice, talking about Marcus like he was a bank account instead of a person. "I'm in therapy now," the email continued, "trying to figure out why I thought any of that was okay. Why I let Maya convince me that strategic divorce timing was somehow smart instead of cruel. And I know this doesn't fix anything. I know sorry doesn't give you back the time I wasted or the trust I destroyed. But I needed you to know that I'm not that person anymore. Or I'm trying not to be." The email ended without asking for anything. No request for reconciliation, no plea for friendship. Just an apology, dropped into Marcus's inbox like a stone into still water. Marcus read it 3 times, then closed his laptop and went for a walk. The Richmond streets were decorated for Christmas. Lights strung between lampposts, wreaths on doors, the whole seasonal pageantry. Marcus walked through it all, his breath fogging in the cold December air, and thought about forgiveness. He didn't forgive Lena. Not really. What she'd done was calculated and cruel, and her apology didn't erase the months of deception or the pain of discovery. But he found that he didn't hate her either. Hatred required energy, attention, emotional investment. And Marcus was fresh out of all 3 when it came to his ex-wife. What he felt instead was something closer to pity. Pity that Lena had let her fears turn her into someone who could plan another person's financial destruction while sharing their bed. Pity that she'd needed to hit rock bottom before recognizing what she'd become. And underneath that pity, barely visible but definitely present, was gratitude. Gratitude that he'd discovered the truth before, wasting more years on a lie. Gratitude that he'd had the courage to test his suspicions instead of ignoring them. Gratitude that he'd gotten out before the 5-year mark, before Lena could execute whatever plan she'd been building toward. Marcus didn't respond to the email. There was nothing to say that wouldn't either hurt Lena more or reopen wounds he was finally starting to let heal. So he let it sit in his inbox, read but unanswered, and moved forward with his life. Christmas came and went. Marcus spent it with his mother in North Carolina, fielding her careful questions about the divorce with practiced patience. New Year's Eve found him at a party thrown by a work colleague, counting down to midnight, surrounded by people who only knew the post-divorce version of him. It felt like a metaphor for something, though Marcus couldn't quite articulate what. In early January, the divorce was finalized. Marcus received the official decree in the mail on a Tuesday afternoon. He stared at it for a long time. All that pain and betrayal reduced to legal boilerplate and official stamps. Then he filed it carefully in a folder marked Important Documents and went about his day. A week later, Marcus did something impulsive. He'd been scrolling through a dating app that a friend had convinced him to download, swiping left on most profiles out of habit more than genuine interest, when he saw a woman who made him stop. Her profile said she was a teacher, newly returned to Richmond after a decade in Seattle, looking to rebuild her social life. Her name was Sarah, and when Marcus messaged her, she responded within an hour. They texted for 3 days before meeting for coffee, which turned into dinner, which turned into a second date, then a third. Marcus didn't tell Sarah about the divorce for the first month, not because he was ashamed, but because he wanted to be more than his recent trauma, wanted to be a person who existed independently of what Lena had done to him. But eventually, on a rainy February evening over takeout Chinese food in his apartment, he told her everything. Sarah listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to sympathy as the story unfolded. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That's brutal," she said finally. "I'm sorry you went through that." "It's okay," Marcus said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. "I mean, it wasn't okay when it was happening, but I'm okay now. Or getting there, anyway. Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, "and you can tell me if it's too personal." "Sure. Do you think you can trust anyone again, after something like that?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think I can trust people who prove they're trustworthy, which I realize sounds obvious. But before all this happened, I trusted by default, assumed the best until proven otherwise. Now I'm more cautious. But cautious isn't the same as closed off. Does that make sense?" Sarah smiled. "It makes a lot of sense." They didn't define what they were to each other that night, or for several months after. Marcus was in no rush to put labels on things, to make promises about the future, and Sarah seemed content to let things develop naturally, without pressure or expectations. It was refreshing. Easy. Different from what he'd had with Lena in ways he was only starting to appreciate. By spring, Marcus had settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Work continued to go well. He'd been assigned to lead a major project that would determine whether he got promoted to director. He was seeing Sarah twice a week, sometimes more. He'd started playing basketball again with a group from his gym. His therapy sessions had decreased to twice a month, and Dr. Erickson seemed pleased with his progress. One evening in April, Marcus was cleaning out his email when he came across Lena's apology again. He'd never deleted it, just let it sink to the bottom of his inbox beneath months of accumulated correspondence. Reading it now, with distance and perspective, he found he could acknowledge its sincerity without feeling the need to absolve her. Some things couldn't be fixed with sorry. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. But that didn't mean he had to carry anger about it forever. Marcus hit reply and typed 4 words. "I hope you're well." Then he sent it and closed his laptop, feeling lighter than he had in months. If you've made it this far, you absolute legend. I need you to do 3 things right now. Smash that subscribe button because you clearly love a story with justice. Drop a like if you think Marcus handled this like a champion. And comment below telling me whether you think Lena deserved that final gesture of peace or if Marcus was too generous. Your engagement literally helps us bring you more stories like this, so don't sleep on it. The response from Lena came 2 days later, just as brief as his message. "I am. Thank you for asking." That was it. No request to meet. No attempt to restart a dialogue. Just a simple acknowledgement and a thank you. Marcus appreciated the restraint. Whatever healing Lena was doing, she was doing it on her own time, without trying to use him as a crutch or confessor. In May, the condo they had owned together finally sold. The market had been good to them, and after paying off the mortgage and splitting the remaining equity, Marcus walked away with $43,000. He used part of it to pay off the last of his legal fees, put some in savings, and invested the rest. The check from the sale felt like the final thread connecting him to Lena being severed. There were no more shared assets, no more joint obligations. They were truly separate people now, their lives diverging in different directions. Summer arrived, hot and humid the way Virginia summers always were. Marcus took a week off in July and went to the beach with Sarah and a group of her friends. He spent the days swimming and reading bad thriller novels on the sand, and the evenings cooking elaborate dinners and playing board games that got increasingly competitive as the wine flowed. It was the most relaxed he'd felt in over a year, maybe longer. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this comfortable in his own skin, this unguarded with other people. One night, sitting on the deck of the rental house watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah leaned against him and said, "You seem happy." "I am," Marcus replied, and meant it completely. "Good," Sarah said. "You deserve to be." Marcus thought about that word, deserve. He'd spent so much time over the past year wondering what he'd done to deserve Lena's betrayal, what cosmic flaw in his character had made him a target for that kind of manipulation. But maybe that was the wrong question. Maybe the better question was what he could do moving forward to deserve the good things that were starting to rebuild in his life. He could be honest, he could be present, he could pay attention to the people around him and treat them with the respect and consideration they deserved. He could learn from his mistakes without letting them define him. That seemed like a decent place to start. By the time Marcus's divorce was officially 1 year in the rearview mirror, he felt like a completely different person from the man who'd stood frozen in his hallway, listening to his wife plot his financial ruin. That man had been naive, trusting to the point of blindness. The man he was now was wiser, more cautious, but not broken. He'd learned that betrayal didn't have to be the end of your story. It could be a chapter, painful and difficult to read, but still just one part of a larger narrative. What came after was up to you. Marcus chose to write a story about recovery, about learning to trust again, slowly and carefully, about building a life that didn't revolve around fear or anger or the need to protect himself from everyone who might hurt him. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the old wounds ached, when he caught himself being suspicious for no reason, when he wondered if he'd ever fully shake the shadow of what Lena had done. But those days became fewer and farther between, until eventually they became the exception rather than the rule. And on the days when the past tried to drag him backward, Marcus would remind himself of a simple truth. He'd survived. He'd tested his wife's love and found it hollow, but in doing so, he'd discovered his own strength. He'd stood up for himself when it would have been easier to pretend. He'd fought for what he deserved and won. That counted for something. That counted for everything. The story of Marcus and Lena's marriage ended the way so many marriages end, not with hatred or violence, but with a quiet dissolution and the slow process of two people rebuilding separate lives. There were no villains, not really, just two people who'd lost their way and hurt each other badly in the process. But Marcus's story didn't end with the divorce. It continued forward, into new relationships and new experiences, into a future that looked nothing like the one he'd imagined when he stood at that vineyard 5 years ago and promised forever to someone who'd already started counting the days. Some marriages end in anger, others end in clarity. Marcus had gotten both, and eventually he'd gotten peace. That was enough.